morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's ICES panel discussion titled South Korea-India Economic and Strategic Ties under the Yoon administration. This panel discussion aims to explore new potential areas in which both India and South Korea are likely to work together in the near future. Today, we are delighted to have with us the following panelists: Dr. Lakwinder Singh, Director of Peace and Security Studies, the Asia Institute, Seoul, South Korea; Professor Young-Joon Kim, Korea National Defense University and member of the National Security Advisory Board, Republic of Korea; Professor Soran Singh, Visiting Professor, University of British Columbia, Vancouver, and Professor, Diplomacy and Disarmament, JNU, New Delhi, India. Before we proceed with the event, we would appreciate if you could switch off your cameras and mute your microphones when the presentations are in progress. If you have any questions or comments, please post them on the Zoom chat box. The questions will be consolidated for the speakers to respond in the interactive session. Today's session is being live streamed on the ICES Facebook page. I would now like to invite Deputy Director of ICES, Hernaik, to chair the discussion. Hernaik, please.
Thank you, Kuntubi. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm stepping in for Dr. Yogesh Joshi. He's at the moment, I think, traveling between the United States and India, and he should be back in Singapore sometime this week. But it's a pleasure to be able to moderate this session by three very distinguished speakers. Kuntubi has introduced them to all of us. The interesting thing is that this is the first time ICES is actually looking at a panel discussion or a seminar focusing on South Korea. And I think one of the least discussed or talked about relationship between South Asia and East Asia is probably that of India and South Korea. I mean, there's a lot of literature and events and activities focusing on India, China, India, Japan, for example, but very little, I think, as far as I know, has been written or spoken about in terms of the Indian and South Korean relationship. Dr. Lakwinder recently, I got in touch with him and we did some pieces on the relationship, both in terms of a podcast and a written literature. So today we are delighted to host this discussion. Right. What we will do is we will provide the opportunity for each of the panelists to share their perspective. And we, at ICES, we look at issues relating to trade and economics. We look at issues relating to geopolitics, strategic issues. So the discussion today will actually encompass all these areas. So each of the speakers will take about 8 to 10 minutes to share their perspectives. And then at the end of the session, we would like to invite General Arvinder Lamba, who's agreed to also join us for this session to say a few words. And then we will open it up, as Kuntubi has mentioned, the floor to the audience. So we look forward both to a lively discussion, a presentation, as well as a lively discussion thereafter. So without further ado, may I take the opportunity to invite Dr. Lakwinder Singh, Director of Peace and Security Studies, the Asia Institute, Seoul, and Korea National Defense University, Seoul, Republic of Korea, to start the proceedings. Dr. Lakwinder, all yours.
Thank you very much. I think this is the first time when an institution, outside institution, is organizing a seminar on India-Korea cooperation. Usually, mostly India and Korea institutions organize a seminar on this topic. So this is maybe the first time when an institution outside India and Korea organizing this important issue topic. So I want to thank organizer for giving us our opportunity to share our perspective. I think this is a very rare opportunity for us to spread our perspective all over the Asia. And this is a very good opportunity for us, so that we can connect with other Indian scholars who are working in the same field in other universities. As you know, in the last few years, India and Korea and USA was pulling into opposite direction. While India was refusing to join any free trade agreement in the region, Korea was refusing to join Quad and other multilateral security institutions. And USA was refusing to join any economic institutions. And USA was already talking about pulling up USA forces outside Korea. So there was no alignment. So there was a lot of disagreement, and it looked some time that this alliance, the Democratic Alliance, may collapse. So last 4 years was very tough for the region, and we somehow managed to survive. But as soon as the President June got elected, suddenly things started changing, and suddenly all things are appearing into alignment. Now, Korea is talking about joining Quad economic institutions, and USA is also showing more interest and building a community in the region. And India is also showing more and more interest in the region. And as you know, in the last 10 years, India was refusing to join any economic agreement. So when RCEP was organized, India blatantly refused to join. So from 2004 to 2010, India signed more than 11 free trade agreements. But suddenly after 2011, India refused to join any economic agreement. So we were having a very tough time how to negotiate this situation. But now suddenly India is showing more and more interest in economic agreements. As we know, India signed the agreement with Mauritius, with the UAE, with Australia. Now we have a free trade agreement with the UK, signing UK also, the European Union also. So suddenly India has changed its position regarding free trade agreements. So and India is showing more and more interest. And India is also becoming a very active player in this supply chain resilience. So I think there's a fundamental change in India's economic policy towards the region. And this opened a very good opportunity for us. With India, Korea, and USA in perfect alignment, I think there's big opportunity for India and Korea to strengthen their economic alignment. I think, as you know, in 2009, India and Korea signed CEPA. It was a comprehensive agreement. For first few years, you know, this agreement showed very good results. And we have a very good progress. So a lot of agreement was signed, trade was growing, and we are talking about 30 billion trade, 40 billion trade. But suddenly something happened because there was serious gap. Indian establishment felt that this CEPA is not working for us. So trade deficit was increasing. And more than 10 out of $20 billion trade, India was having a more than 10 billion trade deficit. So somehow this CEPA refused to work. It could not work. So by 2015, CEPA completely collapsed and we started renegotiation. But because of this, what we call strategic differences, India and Korea, despite numerous meetings, could not solve the problem. But now we feel that India and Korea understand the importance of FTAs, and India and Korea understand the importance of strategic cooperation. I think a new opportunity have arisen when Korea and India can solve their economic issues, which are there's huge potential in the cooperation, but somehow because of a difference in economic difference as well as strategic difference, things was not working as expected. But now, the June taking office, I think we are expecting that suddenly we can see that that all the economic potential we are seeing in this partnership can be realized now. Already things are progressing. As you know, last year we had a more than 40% increase in India-Korea trade. So I think once that CEPA is approved and upgraded, I think the trade target of $50 billion trade will be achieved very fast. So this opportunity is opening a new opportunity for us, and there's also new potential here is increasing. As you know, India and Korea signed the Indo-Pacific Economic Front, and this Indo-Pacific Economic Front is opening a new opportunity. Now we are talking about cooperation in the public health, green energy, as well as road connectivity, digital connectivity. So I think new areas of cooperation that we is not talking about in the last CEPA is now being opened up. So I think the new situation which has happened in Korea is bringing a lot of new opportunities. Korea's tilt towards the USA is going to connect Korea not only with India but the entire region. I think for the first time, Korea is talking about being a global player with worldwide ambitions. I think this is a very good sign for us. I think now Koreans understand the importance of strategic cooperation. Earlier, we were trying very hard. We were trying to get more and more attention from Korea, but Korea was just focusing on too much economic cooperation. But now with Korea looking at India and the region as a strategic player, I think we will be able to achieve much more cooperation. As you know, India Korea have a defense partnership, but he was proposing many new ideas to Koreans, but Korea was refusing to accept. In 2020, we proposed the India Korea defense industry roadmap, but because of lack of strategic understanding, we was not able to achieve much. But I think now this new alignment, I think we will be able to achieve new technical cooperation. India, Korea has many new technology to offer to us, and we can, if we join our energy together, we can keep the balance of power in the region very smoothly. But having said that, we have to acknowledge some kind of the challenges which we are facing now. Even though Korea has aligned with the region, but still, China factor is very important. As you know, last time when China didn't like USA, Korea's threat towards USA, and China imposed very strong economic sanctions on North Korea, or South Korea. This situation is still there. So we have to face, once Korea started taking active steps on the ground, I think Chinese retaliation will be very severe. So we have to prepare Korea that if this something like happen again, but how can we help Korea? Last time when this happened, Korea come very fast without any notice to us. Other countries like India, Japan, we didn't know that what is coming. Korea immediately is coming to Chinese pressure and accepted this three no's agreement. 3-no agreement almost challenged to Korea's sovereignty. It imposed very serious sanctions on Korea, But now we must make sure that something like that not happen. And other important reason is that now, even though currently China, USA, and Korea is aligned, but there are many biggest political sections USA who is not in favoring of strong USA-Korea line. So if in the future, in 2024, Mr. Trump got elections again, we may come back to the same situation. So we should prepare Korea also that how to deal if Trump becomes the president again. So that situation which we are facing now may not be permanent. So we have to prepare Korea to face that situation also. Third, most important challenge is before us is North Korea. If there's any challenge or any casualty in North Korea, we can expect that South Korea may not be able to pay that much attention to the region, to India. So situation South Korea may force back to focus on North Korea again. So the situation which is there now today may not be permanent. So if we really want to avail the opportunity available to us, we should focus on those three challenges. We should make sure that Korea is forced to return back to the pre-June years. That is very serious situation for us. So if we really want to make sure that Korea played an important role, we should strengthen Korea's hands so that Korea can survive. Coming pressure from China, coming pressure from USA, and coming from pressure from Korea. So that is the real purpose of India-Korea strategic partnership. So far, Indian leaders don't think in those terms. Indian leaders think only in terms of economic terms. They don't know that Korea also needs help, that Korea also needs to be strengthened. Many people in India have a very narrow perspective, have a very narrow idea for Korea. But Korea is in a very serious situation. Korea needs help. We have to help Korea to face China. We have to help Korea to face North Korea. We have to help Korea to face USA, because the situation in USA is very unstable. So if we really want to strengthen India-Korea partnership, we should understand what Korea needs from us. So most of India scholars write what Korea can do for us, and they write long articles, long perspective. That's not good. We have to have a real picture. Korea also needs us. So far, our perspective of Korea is very narrow. So today's purpose of seminar is that I want to tell my Indian friends, my Indian colleagues, that try to look at the Korean situation, what is happening in Korean Peninsula, and what will happen if Korea is forced to come to Chinese pressure again. Whole opportunity, whole chance of which is facing now will collapse immediately. That's my core point for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lakhvinder. That's a very interesting and relevant perspective of how things have changed both within South Korea and as well as India's own international perspective with regards to the economic sphere, signing of FTAs and so forth. I have a few questions actually for you, and I'll come to those questions at the end of the session. But very interesting. Thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to invite the second panelist, Professor Yang Jun Kim, Korea National Defense University and member of the National Security Advisory Board, Republic of Korea. Professor, all yours.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate for giving me opportunity to speak this topic with my friend Lakhvinder and Swaran, Professor Singh, now in Canada, right? I really great seeing you after our meeting in India. So yes, I'd like to talk about that now is Dr. Singh already talked about economic cooperation between the two countries. I'd like to focus on the more like military security area for two countries, focusing on the so international situation is now everybody know Russian-Ukraine war made more like the black and white competition between the U.S. lead liberal democracy and also against the other side, China, Russia, revisionist country. So Russian-Ukraine war is now clearly shows war is not just a regional war; it's more like global impact, including energy and food, and in everywhere, even in Africa country, South America country will be influenced by this war. So now it's a small war. The initiative by Russia and China will be disaster for a world country, especially this is being lesson for the China on Taiwan. So in this situation, including the U.S.-Russian tension, also U.S.-China strategic competition, the United States now want to combine Indo-Pacific partnership and NATO old friend in the one hand. So now we need to have the great not many choice for South Korean people to decide ambiguous position, especially this new government, Yoon administration is still very different from the former liberal government, Moon Jae-in administration. Moon Jae-in administration has a more like ideal agenda to create a European Union in Northeast Asia, including China and Russia, but it will be almost impossible in this situation, including the China and Russia with the US to create a European model, Helsinki process or etc. So Yoon administration has no choice now, more focused on the global pivot state role rather than only North Korean problem. So the Yoon administration now focusing on Indo-Pacific partnership, including definitely Japan, India, and Australia, and now firstly join NATO presidential conference next week. So China is already a strong reaction to South Korea to join NATO conference, but I already been to a NATO defense conference last month, and I share about our concern on the this area issue with NATO state. So now it's a golden opportunity already, Dr. Singh point out, especially I call forgotten partner between India and the Republic of Korea to find new area as a blue ocean for partnership between the two countries. India is everybody know now is a new power state, including the large population, also advanced technology, one of the top advanced technology state. So India and South Korea to share many area, not just liberal democracy, but advanced technology, and the to share same common problem, China. So Chinese military expansion is very fundamental problem rather than North Korea. China is a great threat to the Korean Peninsula. Even North Korea fear about Chinese military expansion, and also India has the same problem as well. So India and Republic of Korea to share this kind of issue together, and also the more problem is China Russian combined exercise is getting increased, and also North Korea possibly consider to join China Russia North Korea possible combined exercise in coming years. So Republic of Korea, India have to be, I call axis of liberal democracy, not axis of ever, but axis of democracy. We have to be together, not just economic and cultural relation, but also security and military area. So we have many agenda to share from my perspective is advanced technology for future world, space and cyber, is because we have advanced country. Also, we have the peacekeeping operation combined unit like South Sudan or something like that. For example, Joint Service Staff College in Wellington has a great resources peacekeeping cooperation, education. And the Korean National Defense University in here also has a PKO center. So we have to consider about our joint education, also joint field work together in foreign country. Working together, to fighting together will be very important. And also nuclear deterrence issue. You have a great experience against the Pakistan, and also we have a concern on North Korea and China as well. So we have to study, joint study or joint publication on nuclear deterrence together. And also combined naval exercise in Indian Ocean as well. I already published our article with the Lakafinda on this one. Combined naval exercise will be very important. We can have Australia and United Kingdom and French as well. But for the first step, Indian and ROC naval exercise will be very important. And also defense industry area. I know India used many Russian technology over the decade, but we can have our own R&D and technology for defense industry area. So we have a great country for advanced technology, so we can have our own defense industry joined together. So personally, now I plan to organize the first ROC India strategic dialogue at the KNDU for celebrating 50th anniversary of the ROC India diplomatic relation. So we have many events, but I'd like to lead this kind of track 1.5 dialogue annually. So now is a plan to organize a big conference, big international conference between India and the ROC this fall, maybe October or November. So I'd like to share this dialogue with all of you. And I'd like to fill 4 or 5 sessions for this conference, including defense minister of the ROC. Maybe I would like to invite the Indian counterpart as well, foreign minister or defense minister or vice minister. The 5 sessions will be Indo-Pacific strategy and nuclear deterrence, military cooperation, meaning PKO, peacekeeping operation, and space and defense industry. So this is a current agenda of the Ministry of National Defense in Republic of Korea. So I'd like to continue develop this kind of area, not just civilian area, but also with the government partnership and industry for economic development together. So we can have a direct bilateral relation for the future, especially this administration of the ROC is very support this kind of idea. Beyond only North Korean problem is an agenda for this administration. So we can have a more developed in security military area. Especially we have shared Chinese problem. So it will be very good opportunity. North Korea will be an interesting point, but a more fundamental problem China. So maybe we can develop together with the liberal democratic value together. So I'll stop here and we can have a more discussion after our finishing presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Jun Kim. That was a very interesting perspective, looking at issues of military cooperation, nuclear deterrence, security, and these are areas I think that are not only relevant to both regions, but with the Ukraine crisis, these are areas that are actually very pertinent to all the countries around the world. Thank you for your presentation. Next, it is my pleasure to invite Professor Swaran Singh, visiting professor, University of British Columbia, Vancouver, and Professor Diplomacy and Disarmament, Jawaharlal Nehru University, India. Professor, all yours.
Thank you, Chair. It's my delight to be on the panel with Professor Lakhvinder Singh and Professor Yoon Suk-yeol Kim. Nice to be back again together discussing Indo-Pacific context and how India and South Korea can enhance their both bilateral and multilateral cooperation in the emerging new dynamics of new president Yoon Suk-yeol taking part in Blue House. Let me first begin by talking about larger structural dynamics. Usually we have seen in about last 10 years, to be just talking about a decade, one could go beyond. It's largely the US-China contest, and Professor Kim mentioned it is primarily China and North Korea. So this is increasingly the contest between US and China that has made very often the other regional players to be feeling like being pushed to choosing sides. And therefore, very often, even if countries like South Korea or India try to evolve a more nuanced policy, the analysis very often try to see them inching towards one or the other side. So, for example, Moon Jae-in's new northern policy that we saw earlier was seen as a tilt towards resolving issues with North Korea, and therefore also being kind of, at least in the first 2 years, soft on China. And that created certain insinuations that maybe opportunities for US to build close cooperation with South Korea, other than the bilateral summit meetings, which failed again, were limited. And therefore, by extension, also South Korean cooperation with Japan and even India would therefore be circumscribed at least. So in that context, with the new president, Yoon Suk-yeol, coming to the Blue House, in fact, both White House and Blue House have now new presidents. There is an expectation of change. And expectation of change is also driven by the fact that People's Power Party, and we know that conservatives have traditionally been more close to United States, also creates a domestic constituency in South Korea that the change is likely. And change is clearly being articulated by the president, talking about strategic clarity, talking about making South Korea pivot of the larger region, and the whole focus on expanding cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region, aligning better with the US Indo-Pacific strategy. And he keeps talking about democratic values. He talks about like-minded countries, liberal democracies, and how those are going to be the new kind of linkages for Seoul to make sure that South Korea gradually becomes a global pivotal state in the region, and therefore begins to play a much more influential and deterministic role in how situations evolve in the larger region, not just only in bilaterals in terms of North Korea, Japan, or United States or India. We have understood that Moon's new southern policy had also linkages with the southern states of either Southeast Asia or India, and they had become relatively more robust in his second 2 years of the term, and that included partly the transformation that we saw in Quad. Quad was initially being touted to be a kind of an Asian NATO, and therefore when India withstood that understanding that India wouldn't like to see this region being militarized or Quad becoming an exclusive club of few nations, and that transformation gradually in Quad also made, I think, Moon Jae-in's policies in engaging Quad little more comfortable. And indeed now President Yoon has openly been mentioning of joining the Quad, or at least joining some of the working groups that Quad has created over a period of time. And therefore in that, I think regional dynamics and domestic politics changing in South Korea, there is a greater opportunity for South Korea and India to work together at the regional level, but also the kind of reinforce that bonhomie camaraderie in pushing forward their bilateral cooperation, which has been happening already in sectors like information communication technology. Mention of defense sector was already made. And more recently, I think this whole talk about post-pandemic supply chain resilience initiatives. So in that sense, prosperous and peaceful Indo-Pacific is how President Yoon often articulates his vision, will further strengthen possibilities of some of these bilateral partnerships going forward. And we have seen that senior Indian defense leaders, defense minister himself had visited South Korea in 2019, followed by General Naravane, the army chief, visiting in 2020. I think and the air chief, Air Force chief went there in 2021. And I'm hearing that Professor Kim wants to bring Indian defense minister or foreign minister back again in his 1.5 or sort of the initiative that he's taking. And in that sense, I think the existing cooperation in defense or in space or in cyber technologies would really be able to go strong, because you heard Prime Minister recently speaking in the BRICS summit meeting how digital economy of India itself offers about $1 trillion worth of space for investments. And in total, about $1.5 trillion of investments could potentially be kind of absorbed in India. So a great deal of space cooperation has been happening, for example, between India's GPS-aided geo-augmented navigation and Korea's augmentation satellite system, which is called Gagan and KES. But I think more recently, let me also mention the 100 K9 Bajra armored systems that Larsen & Toubro has manufactured with South Korean technologies are being deployed on the Chinese border, which is a direct indication of how India-South Korea defense cooperation can be so visible in addressing the China challenge. And in that sense, I think as we begin to see the kind of attempt in the Blue House to, let's say, use that strategic clarity to restore US-South Korea strategic alliance and link better with the liberal democracies, democratic values, we will see greater collaboration, coordination between, let's say, the similar visions of India's Act East policy or Look East policy and South Korea's Northeast Asia Peace and Cooperative Initiative. So I think in that sense, we will notice that there is a different mood now. There is a different regional dynamics, which is where Quad is no longer seen as a military, even potentially military. It's totally focusing on non-traditional and other sectors like climate change, advanced technologies, cybersecurity, and other things. So we will perhaps see that both bilaterals, both domestic and regional dynamics are creating space to sort of allow this new enthusiasm to fructify in some sense of pushing their mutual cooperation much faster forward. And I think in that sense, one would notice that there is a possibility. If you notice all the speeches that President Yoon has been making, starting from his inaugural speech, I think there is a kind of an enthusiasm that one notices. And I dare say, with all my sort of modesty, that perhaps India in that sense showcases being a little ahead on the same road that President Yoon wants to walk in the coming years, at least in engaging at the regional level, as he says, turning South Korea into global pivotal state in the Indo-Pacific region. India has withstood a certain amount of pressures and put its points very clearly across very often in Quad meetings. The most recent in Tokyo, you saw, despite all the campaign that President Biden has on seeing that if Quad can together denounce Russia, that didn't happen there. India has made sure that the focus remains on the region and not on extra-regional issues, and therefore focus remains on terrorism, on North Korea, on China. And I think in that sense, this is the same thing as emerging middle power South Korea, with enormous advantage of advanced technology. Semiconductors is a great example. Can really bring forth a certain amount of value addition to the kind of things that India wants to do. And together they could in fact complement each other. I'm also reminded of the Asia hockey match in Indonesia, where the India and South Korean teams ultimately drew a draw. But congratulations and best wishes to South Korean team, which is now part of the Super 4 there. So I think there are all levels at which I think one would see greater camaraderie, greater understanding. And let me just mention briefly the latest initiative that we are hearing is about 2 days back, where we heard this joint statement coming from Australia, Japan, New Zealand, UK, and US, where the EU and France were sitting as observers, starting something they call Partners in Blue Pacific. And just like in Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, South Korea is there and so is India. Indeed, in this new Partners for Blue Pacific initiative 2 days back, neither India nor South Korea are apparently seen, but I'm sure as this building of Blue Pacific agenda for 21st century of United States moves forward in engaging Pacific Island Forum and island states, where they believe that together they have invested $2+ billion already they would see greater engagement happening between countries like India and South Korea, even in that Partners in Blue Pacific initiative. And that could become more likely if India and South Korea are beginning to develop better kind of cooperation, camaraderie. And I think because the visions are beginning to appear like coming closer, at least in the regional context, that should be giving a certain impetus to not just their cooperation at the regional level, but also, I think, enhance and strengthen and reinforce their bilateral cooperation in a whole range of sectors where they've been working together. And I would give my best wishes to Professor Kim's plan to invite Indian Foreign or Defense Minister, because that could be the first important event in that sense to showcase that kind of potential transformation that can occur in India-South Korea relations, which are going fine and robust. But I think there is a much greater potential to take it forward, both in bilateral and regional context. I should stop here. I think I finished my time, but I look forward to any comments and questions. And let me also say, great delight to have General Lamba with us. I have also read his writings, and I'm delighted that he's a discussant with us today. And I look forward to his comments on what three of us have just said. Let me stop here and back to the chair.
Thank you, Professor Swaran Singh, for that insightful presentation. Before I invite General Lamba to say a few words, we have some questions, and I would like to invite the participants to just key in their questions in the chat group. In that way, I'll be quite happy to forego my privilege as a chair to ask the questions first and then open the floor almost immediately to everyone. At this juncture, I would like to invite General Lamba to make some comments on the presentation and on the topic proper. General, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I thank the university and I thank Dr. Lakhvinder for giving me this opportunity to speak on an area where I've been following very closely. It's an absolute honor to be on the same panel as Dr. Kim, Dr. Lakhvinder, and Dr. Swaran Singh, who are virtually authority. I mean, Dr. Swaran Singh, I've heard him a lot, worked with him a couple of seminars, and with Dr. Lakhvinder as well, I've been in touch recently. And I think I'll not comment on what people have said, but I'll try and put together in a perspective that I think would actually be benefit for us. And because every participant has made focus points, and these pointers really converge to the one and only direction we are seeking, is convergence into a good outcome between India and South Korea, which I think are in a state of a middle power that really can make a difference. So I think my last article written in the Korean Times was highlighting that the geopolitics of this region is probably changing the most. There is nowhere else in the world a maze of complexity than in these areas where conflict can emerge and it's risk prone. What I say is truly in the perspective of the change of policies that we have from President Moon's Look North policy that it was essentially, and then it was followed by a late realization of the new Southern policy, where India and ASEAN were to be engaged, but there was a step back. So I think the come around now, the challenge really for not only South Korea, but the region and everybody else is these determinants that President Yoon has listed are really those areas where we need to put together a lot of work and effort. I was very happy to hear Dr. Kim, who's highlighted, the threat that we have a common threat, and he culminated in saying that what India, Japan, Australia, and new areas of cooperation are important. But I think he made the most important point relevant today is the China, Russia, and North Korea alignment. That could be a danger for the future. I think that's the most important pickup from him. He also highlighted what kind of cooperation that we can do. And he pointed out, and Dr. Kim pointed out, space cooperation, it could be defense industrial cooperation, cyber partnerships, and defense industrialization. And I think these are the key where both the countries can really take it forward because it is a mutual perspective. Third is, if these policies which have been set out by President Yoon have to be endured and have to be sustained. I don't think that this is a state that South Korea by itself can manage. It's a big step away. It's a big step away, and Dr. Swaran Singh also aligned to a good thought that how do we actually help South Korea maintain this direction? Because the criticality of South Korea as part of, so whatever it is a little away, part from Indo-Pacific, of the Quad, and any other organizations in the region, I think it's a collective call that has to be taken by not only South Korea, but those nations which actually stand for the larger cause of democracies, larger cause of peace and stability. With him having declared South Korea that his view and vision is that of a global pivotal state, I think it means a lot. He has spelled out three things, how he would align towards the South with a traditional and a very old ally in the US, and as a step forward from there with India, ASEAN, and the other nations of both the Far East and the Southeast. This global pivotal initiative is a great step forward. It gives the clarity that South Korea has never seen, given itself so far, not in many times. And I also recall that one of the most turbulent relationships, or most uneven and most largest uncertainties have been in the way that India and South Korea have moved. We have accomplished a lot, but still there has been ambiguity, if not a difference. And I think that's what we need to see and identify. India's position is something I'd like to talk about, why it is important to South Korea and why South Korea is a big gainer. And I agree with his global pivotal state perspective, because I think India, as we know that not only as the MEA, Mr. Jaishankar, our foreign minister, has said repeatedly, but I think he has highlighted three issues as never clear as this before, that we are guided by national values, national interests, and national security strategy. If we are now guided, it shows the sense of geopolitical positioning that India wants to be viewed in. And if India has to be viewed in this perspective, it needs to then position itself not only as an individual, but in its immediate neighborhood in South Asia, in the context of ASEAN, which is building up a very close relationship, and certainly now in the area in various areas with South Korea, which gives it a lot of impact. Just like there are trilaterals of US, Korea, and Japan, I have written about it, and I strongly feel that India, South Korea, Japan is a trilateral that's going to be very meaningful, and this could be extended to countries like Vietnam and Philippines, who would actually make a very strong and potent cooperational arena where people can talk about democracies and ensure that good and stability for the time being, for the long term, is ensured. Two more things are important. One is the missile testing binge that North Korea is on. I think this is not only a danger for South Korea, but it's a danger in the region. It's a danger for the larger perspective. And with Hwasong 17, which has been reportedly tested, that can hit the United States from North Korea, I think the dimensions and magnitude of this threat need to be reviewed. Finally, while security cooperation can be enlarged by the areas that Dr. Kim said and Professor Swaran Singh said, but I think the exercises participation, whether it's Malabar or a slew of other exercises that are done by India, can be extremely beneficial as the first step of getting them back into this fold and doing a large-scale canvas in cooperation. I think this is understanding of the highest order when the services actually navigate their challenge collectively. A very good point raised was about the Chief of Army Staff, who has visited Korea and given a lot of importance to how things can be taken forward. K9, I think, is only a trailer of what more can follow. Finally, my one or two recommendations are: geopolitics do change, and they change based on circumstances. But some countries sometimes have to step up to change and realign the geopolitics of this region. I think Indo-Pacific is the greatest challenge. With President Biden making the first visit to South Korea, I think it was only an assurance, not only to launch the IPEF, but an assurance to South Korea that the old-time alliance will be firm, foundational, and basic to future growth. It's also a signal to big countries and democracies like India, on whom United States and other countries today depend upon, to take the strength of a conviction that countries move together based on stability, national values, and national interests. And finally, to say that a lot has been said in this. It may be time to actually take this forward. Dr. Kim also mentioned about discussing this, inviting the foreign ministers for a meeting. I think these steps will really help us a lot. This is just the beginning, and I think there is a long, long way to go for the transformation that I perceive in India and South Korea strategic relationship. Thank you. I'll stop here. If there be any questions, I'll take them on later.
Thank you very much, General Lamba, for your views as well. I think together, the four of you have provided a very holistic perspective of the relationship between India and South Korea, as well as what it means for not just only the region, but for the rest of the world. We have a number of questions lined up. So let me start very quickly with the first one from Namrata Yadav. This is her question. This week, President Yoon will be attending the NATO summit, bringing him closer to building relations with the US and other Quad members. Yoon has also previously asked for India's support in building South Korea relations with the Quad. What impact is that supposed to have on India-Korea's relation from a strategic perspective? Perhaps we can take this question first, and then there are three questions from Professor Raja Mohan, which I will pose together to all of you. So can I invite Professor Kim to probably take this one first, and then General Lamba as well.
Yes, thank you for the great question. And the administration definitely the request invitation for the port, and he already mentioned about the Wall Street Journal interview. If Quad state invite South Korea to join them officially, it will be very positive consideration by the administration. So this is a very important moment, and I think NATO summit attendance is one of the signal for the United administration to join US lead the alliance, including Indo-Pacific area and NATO country. So it will be very great impact for the bilateral relation between the India and the South Korea for future collaboration. So I think it's a great opportunity, a strategic mutual interest between the two for the port and India invitation. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. General Lamba?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. As far as joining the Quad is concerned, I think it's very important. There are two aspects will come in. One is, does South Korea actually play a role in India's Indo-Pacific? And the second one is it becoming a part of the Quad. So I think two things, but I would say that these transformations are not easy to happen. These transformations have just about begun in concept, yet to be realized on ground, and they will have to be realized by a fairly concrete stepping forward and aligning by the big powers. I think where South Korea and India have a convergence today, in my view, is that both these countries are today middle powers, yes, but in terms of influence, particularly India, the influence that India can impel in any region today, not just South Asia, we have our own problems in South Asia, but it can impel a new dynamic in impacting the environment that creates or facilitates more partners joining into the Indo-Pacific. And I think The larger cause is Indo-Pacific and then the Quad. South Korea's joining the Quad to me is not as important as first delving and becoming a part of the Indo-Pacific strategy. The moment that happens, it's not only I see as South Korea as stepping in, but the other states which are in a similar evolution, and I have named a few of them, would also be there. So I think as part of the Indo-Pacific, India can facilitate South Korea's understanding and the region understanding South Korea's capability. That's the positive role that India can play. And South Korea can surely reach out to the best possible convergences that we can build on. So I've taken it in two parts. One, being a part of the Quad, not as necessary as being a part of the Indo-Pacific in letter, spirit, and action, and drawing those middle powers today like Japan, India, South Korea. These are now not really middle powers anymore. I see them militarily and influence-wise powers that can change and realign the configurations and geopolitics in certain region. That's where I think India can facilitate South Korea's entry and cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Professor Swaran, do you want to share your thoughts as well?
Thank you. I think I mostly agree with the two comments made, and the way General Lamba said, this is how India has usually viewed how nations can play a role at either regional level or global level. They need not begin by becoming part and parcel of established structures. They have to first establish their credentials and then begin to look like sort of likely candidates which are generally acceptable. And in that sense, South Korea potentially is welcome to be part of Quad, because you remember when we were talking of Quad Plus, we were talking of South Korea, Vietnam, and New Zealand. And now, of course, with the IPEF, there are several other nations who potentially could be participating and partnering with Quad initiatives. Last point, I think what is most interesting is how President Yoon is, of course, showing his sort of willingness to be part and parcel of Quad. But he's also saying that we could perhaps begin by partnering with various working groups of Quad. So in that sense, gradually piecemeal joining and joining in the sense of deserving to be partners, as General Lamba just mentioned, I think that's a strategy that India would find much at home with. And of course, India would be more than happy to support South Korea joining Quad and other initiatives at regional level, simply because one is noticing increasingly larger overlap. I understand there are divergences, but the larger overlap in their overall vision as to how they wish to calibrate regional dynamics, and also the potential of them being capable as sort of middle powers in the region. And the more complementarity is visible, and therefore I think potentially possibility of India definitely being a country to support South Korea's desire to play, as I said, global pivotal state role in the region. That's my brief response to it.
Thank you. I just have a quick question as well. I mean, India's perspective of the Quad is somewhat different from the other three partners. I mean, when it was focused largely on the military component, India was a bit concerned. Do you see Korea's own perception similar to that of India as far as the Quad is concerned, or in tandem with the other three partners of the Quad? So it's basically asking you, is Korea's focus more military as far as the Quad is concerned, or beyond that?
Thank you, I think, for asking an India-specific question, because this is very often not really noticed or appreciated, that India has withstood various, let's say, either allurements, incentives, or pressures to deviate from its sort of gravitation point. And one has noticed that India has perhaps contributed to why Quad is no longer being seen as Asian NATO, and increasingly not also being seen as far too much US-centric and therefore far too much China-centric. So I think that kind of nuanced evolution of Quad, I would mentioned that perhaps credit lies on India's engagement with these discussions at various levels. As for South Korea and India's sort of foreign policy posturing and sort of visions, I wouldn't say they are identical. They obviously cannot be identical. South Korea is in alliance with the United States. India is, some people say, inching in that direction, but not yet an alliance partner. So definitely how they would engage US Indo-Pacific strategy, there could be minor sort of divergences, variations in that. But I noticed that on certain larger issues like not militarizing, if you remember Mike Pompeo's speeches initially, so much focus on sort of creating a certain amount of sharp response to China, which didn't happen. And ultimately, the White House decided to create AUKUS to take care of that component. And Quad continues to focus on, let's say, softer areas of non-traditional security, cyber security, skill building, climate change, advanced technologies, critical technology, post-pandemic, etc. And I think that makes South Korea relatively more kind of a like-minded partner, to use President Yoon's repeated expressions. So there is a proximity which is, I underline, there's an overlap which I underline is apparently increasing, driven by both structural factors and domestic drivers of these two countries. And in that sense, proximity, yes, but yes, they are not identical policies as far as Indo-Pacific is concerned.
Thank you. Maybe I'll go to the next question. It comes from Professor Raja Mohan. South Korea is deeply polarized as far as foreign policy issues are concerned. For example, the US, China, North Korea issues. Given the narrow win for the new president, what is the likelihood of the current policy being reversed by the next president? Dr. Lakhvinder and Professor Kim, maybe you want to take this?
Okay, I will take first. I fully agree with the question. Actually, I'd like to add one more point. Not only the next president, but even the current president may be forced to change the policy. What has happened is the political position that President Yoon has taken. But Korea's actual position, strength to resist the Chinese pressure, North Korean pressure stays the same. Actually, they have deteriorated. So once the pressure start coming from China or even from North Korea, so it may not be maintainable. Current policy may not be maintainable. So Professor Rajmohan is perfectly correct when he asked this question. Actually, we are worried even with the current administration that this current policy may not be maintainable. So that is why I was trying to tell our audience that we in India have to come to the rescue of South Korea. So South Korea is aligning with the USA, with India. It's a very good opportunity for us. But this alignment is not permanent or long-lived. So this can change very fast. So now, as a nation, as a democracy, we should start thinking how we can help Korea, how we can strengthen Korea's capability to resist pressure from China. So that is a fundamental question we are facing today. Not many Indian scholars understand the balanced power in the region. And that is the critical point. So Professor Rajmohan has asked a very good question, and this question should be asked. And his question about this economic question about this semiconductor, about this EV, even for defense industry, are correlated. Earlier, India was asking cooperation in this sector, but Korea was refusing because all these technologies, all these products have a double use. Korea was not sure that because they can be used in the military also. So because of China pressure, Korea was not saying yes. So even though if you come to Korea, our government has proposed many new ideas in the defense sector, but Korea was responding properly because of China pressure. Now that China pressure has gone because of new political position taken by President Yoon. But now so far, only last 2-3 months, Chinese are quiet. They're not starting any counter pressure on US, South Korea. But everybody who's watching Korea closely know that Chinese pressure, Chinese blackmailing, just a matter of time. Now, question is this: once Chinese start putting pressure on South Korea, once Chinese start change of policy, can Korea withstand Chinese pressure? Last time, Mr. Moon was not ready to accept 3 no negotiation with China, but he was forced to accept it because South Korea's capability to resist Chinese economic pressure is very limited. So nothing has changed since then. Korea is still very, very vulnerable to Chinese pressure, to North Korean pressure. So that's what I'm trying to say today, that we in India should understand that Korea is very important strategically for us. Korea can be a very important player in the Indo-Pacific. But to keep Korea in the Indo-Pacific, we have to do some groundwork. We have to do some homework. We have to help Korea to stand its feet against Chinese pressure, against North Korean pressure. So the whole purpose of our negotiation is that we should come to understand how we can help Korea. So Professor Rajmohan Raj is asking very, very important and relevant question. Korea is not in a position to resist Chinese pressure. We have to help Korea so that Korea can stand and Korea can maintain current policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Kim, any thoughts?
Yeah, the question is great. Is that just like any other country, South Korea also has very divided into the two political group, liberal and conservative. Yoon Suk-yeol is definitely conservative. South Korean support the foreign policy will be conducted like joining the Quad, joining the Five Eyes country, and more hawkish against North Korea and China. And if definitely if a presidential election goes to liberal president after 5 years, it will be definitely reverse of the old policy, like the Yoon administration, just like Yoon administration now, anything but Moon Jae-in. So it will be a possible question. So interesting is South Korea is very divided into the foreign policy area. Maybe the US has no pro-Chinese political group, for example. So there is a very similar foreign policy between the GOP, Republican, and Democrat. Whoever will take the White House, very hawkish against China. Trump is unconventional, but yeah, most of the country are same foreign policy, but South Korea is very different. So the question is very great and definitely right question. And the third question regarding defense cooperation. Now we understand India, the defense industry based on Russian technology, and then it's very difficult to find the commonality between the two countries. But just like the question, India want to have a domestic defense production with the help of foreign investment. So there will be the possible partnership. And so for future concept about like space and cyber area, we can do a much better collaboration rather than conventional weapon based on Russian, and South Korea is based on American technology. So my question is that to the question.
Thanks, Professor Kim. Thank you. Professor Kim has actually answered Professor Raja Mohan's third question. And for those of you who may not be able to see the question, it's on defense cooperation. India is looking for more domestic defense production with the help of foreign investment. What is the level of Korean interest? And I think Professor Kim has answered that. If the other panelists have any views on the third question, then I will come back to the second question. Please feel free to share your thoughts on defense cooperation and how Korea can play a role in India's...
I would like to add some point.
Yes, sure, Dr. Lakwinder.
India, in 2020, India and Korea have signed a India-Korea Defense Industry Roadmap. It is a very, if you study that roadmap, it's very extensive roadmap. So vision is there, already there, you know. Vision is already there and plan is already there. But somehow Korea was at practical level, ground level, Korea was not ready to share some of the important sensitive technology. And that because we can understand. We can understand because there was some political element was missing, you know, and defense alignment was missing. So now that alignment has come. New president is very strongly inclined towards USA and inclined towards Indo-Pacific. So to some extent, as long as his current president is able to maintain his current policy, so we can expect that Korea can share some of the important defense technology and Korea can invest in Indian defense industry. So as long as so that's why again I'm coming to the president point. And how long current president can maintain the current position? Because South Korea is in a very vulnerable situation. So as long as Korean president is able to maintain the current policy position, so Korea should be no problem in investing in India's defense industry. Like as you know, Korea's defense industry is very advanced. even though it's a very short age, but it is very advanced. It has very sensitive technology, very important technology, which can play a very important role in the modernization of Indian armed forces. So that is why we are trying to get as much technology as possible. But Scotch is coming again and again. How long South Korean president can maintain its current policy position? So that is what I'm trying to tell my Indian friends. If we really want to have Indian South Korean technology, first we should make sure that South Korean president, current president, stand on strong footing. He is able to maintain current position. As long as South Korean president is able to maintain its current policy position, there should be no problem in South Korea sharing us with important technology, important defense tech, especially in the shipping, especially in the Air Force. So many requests coming from Korea, India. So the main focus of our strategy in Korea should be that current president should be strengthened. His political position and economic position should be strengthened. Korea is a heavily dependent on China. Heavily dependent on economically dependent on China. So India as a big market should open our market to India so that South Korean president can have some strong footing. So that when Chinese start exploiting, start blackmailing South Korean president and try to put pressure to change the policy so that we can extend some kind of economic opportunity for the new president. So our job, our opportunity is to tell our Indian policymaker what they can do to strengthen the Korean president. So Korean president should stay strong, should stay static on this current position. So that is my concern. As far as defense technology is concerned, there's not a problem. I've lived in Korea for a long time. Koreans want to share with us a lot of technology, a lot of idea, a lot of investment. Korea is not short of money. Korea is full of money. Korean banks are full of money. They can invest as much as they want. Problem is not a problem that is there a political alignment? Is there a policy alignment? Is there a defense alignment? Must there be defense alignment is there? Money will follow. So first thing first, let's strengthen current president policy position. I cannot emphasize this part enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lakwinder. Professor Soren, General Lamba, any thoughts?
I just have two brief points to make. One is about perspectives of the Quad members and how does South Korea fit at its perspective. I think that was in the first two questions. It's an established fact that evolution of such forums or platforms like the Quad take time to fructify. They are coming, the transformation or the transition from a concept to realization can be long. And we've seen NATO, despite having been the decades it has, still poses challenges today when it is faced by a unique problem. So I think what India needs to be seen as, like people felt that India may have a different perspective in Quad, with India having, with Indo-PACOM, the Indo-Pacific Command having been integrated, the navies of the two countries having been navigated, with US stepping in a very big way, I think the larger perspective and landscape geopolitically is clear to everyone. Between that, how India wishes to see, because it has to do a rebalancing act for its own national interests. So how it defines China is its prerogative. And I'm sure over the last 2 months, enough has been said, just like in the Ukraine war, about India's engagement with Russia. There is a need to appreciate why India takes the stand it does. And in one line, I just say this, it's been a conviction with me that India's role against China or against Russia is easy to adopt. But the balancing that India and Russia can do, particularly in keeping China out, is very important. So that's just one small relevant phrase that I brought out. Coming back to the second part, that South Korea has an internal challenge, and that is of the foreign policy division. Even now, as I read on the day of the election, I think the difference was between 1 and 1.5% of total votes that actually got. So the challenge is President Yoon's, but I have a larger perspective to present. It's time that the world gets together, and the world got together to bring India into such a major platform and allow it to get the position, the geopolitical position that it can play a major role today, not only in its neighborhood, but also in extended neighborhoods. Similarly, I think with its alliance with the US, now with India, with other countries in the region, with Japan, Australia, Vietnam, Philippines, there is a very strong posturing that can be done to reassure South Korea, you don't have to step back. This is a challenge you've taken up. You cannot step back easily because, like Dr. Lakwinder pointed out, the challenge is, will it happen in the present president's tenure? I think no. The answer is, while he tries to endure, the world has a interest and a perspective in larger global stability perspective. And that is to stand by, to strengthen, to inspire, and also to present a front that South Korea is a balanced nation. It needs stability. Its proximity to China itself is a challenge. So I think the world has a responsibility in helping the present option be endurable and sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Swaran, do you have any thoughts?
Okay, let me quickly add. I think I first of all agree with Jan Lamba saying that visions take time to fructify. And that applies to even individual visions of specific leaders. They could basically indicate to the orientation that they have, they could indicate to the potential, but of course, it will take time to achieve things on the ground. Now, what we are fundamentally saying here is that with the coming of the new leader, whether it is in India or in South Korea, what happens is that different sectors get prioritized. So when it comes to South Korea, India engagement between them, they have had good relations with each other. I gave examples of strong cybersecurity, space, defense cooperation, commercial enterprises, investments. But of course, because Moon Jae-in's focus initially particularly was very much on doing something groundbreaking vis-a-vis North Korea and engaging United States from that perspective of ensuring 2 direct summit meetings between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, then that left only limited space and energy to deal with other potential partners or existing partners, including India in that sense. That is where I think the potential is increasing, because now the focus is slightly different, and that puts the proximity between India and South Korea much more closer in focus. Professor Rajmohan mentioned about semiconductor and electric vehicles. They could be specific sectors. For example, India is already trying its best to ensure that we could build partnerships in India's Make in India mission almost, where locally producing semiconductors, which have become a hot potatoes commodity around the world now, is a high priority. Similarly, if you hear India's Minister of Transport, for example, and of course the whole focus on climate change and cutting down on carbon footprint, electric vehicles is another priority area for India. So India has its own priority areas where South Korea's advanced technologies stand advantage. And of course, I like the way Lakwinder Singh mentioned about deep pockets and desire to invest. And in that sense, there is an enormous infrastructure deficit which can be filled in India. So what we are saying is that there are now emerging specific sectors which would perhaps create those opportunities to fructify that vision and be supported and facilitated by changing regional, bilateral, domestic dynamics on both sides. So that is where the inching towards a stronger partnership is what we are indicating. But of course, there are going to be hiccups, there are going to be timelines, there are going to be issues. So those are larger kind of broad brush trajectories that we're indicating, which appear to be positive in bringing these two countries together, playing their role and complementing each other at the regional level. Naval exercises were mentioned, or even strengthening their bilateral equations and bilateral partnerships. And there are interesting new sectors that will really encourage them to go forward in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. The next questions come from Shavinia, and her question is: South Korea and the US share similar interests on security challenges in the region. However, South Korea is restrained by the geostrategic realities of being territorially and economically close to China. And I think this is the point that all the speakers have alluded to. The new Southern policy involves deepening ties with India and ASEAN. How does this affect US-China interests in the region? Open to anyone. Professor Swaran, you want to take this one first? Since
okay,
you
no problem. I think I'm happy to briefly say something, and I'm sure my other co-panelists will have also their points on it.
Sure.
And I think throughout my intervention, I was indicating how South Korea has different pulls and pushes. And it is, of course, part of NATO, and in that sense, meeting at NATO summit meeting, close alliance partner of United States, is a close sort of economic partnership with China. So there are indications of things that India would take note of in, and not sort of going whole hog and becoming the strongest sort of advocate of South Korea joining Quad immediately. So it's going to be a holistic examination of which are the areas where India, South Korea are moving together. What are the leverages India today has in supporting South Korea's playing a larger role in the region, or sort of developing more stronger bilateral partnerships with India. Mention was also made of almost 1% voting difference. So domestically, those will continue to be challenges for President Yoon domestically to see what are the areas he wants to focus on to continue with that kind of a support at home in that sense, and not pushing ideas where the domestic thin support could come into question. So those are hiccups that will continue. Those are variations that will continue. But yes, Quad is in a mood today to begin to think of adding on other partners, if not directly as members, at least in certain other sort of ways and means. And South Korea definitely is a very strong sort of candidate in that direction. And India finds no problem in working together with South Korea in Quad, partly because so much has already been happening between these two nations. So in that sense, I think this could also be a kind of a, shall we say, a quick implementation area for President Yoon to showcase how his regional and global acceptability and credibility can help him also reinforce and strengthen his domestic credentials and domestic support as well. So in that sense also, I think there's a linkage of how his engagement with a country like India, I'm not saying would entirely change domestic opinion, but could have at least minor sort of spin-off advantage to him to showcase that he is becoming an acceptable and influential leader in the region.
Thank you. General Lamba, do you have any thoughts?
Just very brief that I think the three levels have been pointed out. Internally, the South Korea people have to be first convinced that this is the thought for tomorrow. There has to be the ambiguity in their mind and the uncertainty in their mind by the leaders today has to be realigned to say, this is or is this not the right direction? You know, I think what delays any decision of this nature in foreign policy is the internal dynamics, and this is most visible in this case. So I think at level one, the people have to be convinced that this is the right direction in the long term. Second is, with India and South Korea, the partnership can be very strong, and I delved on this a little while ago, why it can be so profound. Both are virtually middle powers, not in terms of capability, not in terms of outreach, but in terms of influence and their geopolitical standing. Of course, in South Korea, the geopolitical standing is the challenge. They still have to emerge like India did in an independent platform to be on this. And finally, I think the Professor Swan pointed out very well that there is a need for time to evolve, to allow these convergences to evolve. And by nature, as these first two levels get resolved, I think the third level will only be a natural fallout of integration of South Korea into the mainstream of Indo-Pacific or the Quad, which I still said is a pathway. It is not a destination. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Dr. Lakhvinder, any thoughts?
Yes, I think the last part of his question is very important, which has been not properly addressed by other panelists. He wants to know how it will affect the USA-China interest. And this is a very important question. You know, when we're talking about Quad, the critical point is how USA-China behave themselves. So how this merging alliance is going to rectify itself in the region. So I think with China, with South Korea heavily tilting towards USA is going to intensify the power struggle between US and China. And this is going to change everything. how we do the business, how we do the economic management, how we do our security management. I think we simply cannot afford to ignore this growing intensity between China and USA. Ukraine war has put a lot of pressure on China, and I think to some extent, Ukraine war has shown the limits of USA power, economically as well as militarily as well as diplomatically. I think to some extent, China may be encouraged to challenge USA in the region. So that with the USA, with South Korea is having tilted towards USA, I think China may not feel comfortable in this situation. So I think China may intensify its moves in the region, in South China Sea, in North Korean Peninsula. I think we can say that China may feel threatened to some extent by USA, South Korea's recent policy moves. So I think we should keep a close eye on how China reacts in the region. Thank you. This is a very important point.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Lakwinder. I just want to take the point of China, because we discussed China quite a fair bit during the presentation and the question and answer session. And you mentioned quite rightly that China feels threatened and is likely to probably project greater dominance in the region. If you take that into perspective, and India has always been mindful of the China factor, it's always been in the foreground rather than the background. How do you see the China factor playing out in India's South Korea relations? Because you mentioned there's a need for India to be more proactive in South Korea, but with China looming large, and the Quad being an example of why India was quite concerned because it was seen as trying to encircle China. Do you see the relationship really taking off?
Yes, very important question, very good question. China is a very important factor in the South Korea-India relations, because it is because of China factor that South Korea and India are coming together in the first place. So, but because of China itself, that yes, South Korea was not able to respond to India's technology transfer request, to India's economic partnership request. Almost everywhere, economic partnership as well as a military partnership, cultural partnership, China come into play in every aspect. To some extent, China is all over the place in India-Korea partnership. So you cannot ignore it, no matter how much you want to pretend that China is not there. But China is always there. In every way, directly or indirectly, is trying to influence India-Korea strategic partnership. So when I started writing about India-Korea partnership, I also brought China factor into the play. Because, as you know, China, South Korea is heavily dependent on exports. But China, uses the Indian Ocean and South China Sea to merchandise a product to the world. And China is a dominating that region, Indian Ocean as well as the South China Sea. So South Korea simply cannot ignore China factor in its foreign policy agenda. So whenever it tries to improve its relations with ASEAN, with India, China factor come into play. Same thing is happening with India-Korea partnership. Also, again, during the June administration, we tried our best because to strengthen our military cooperation. And we asked for many technology transfer. But again and again, in the open discussion, they always say, okay, just let's do it. But when it actually come to materializing, actually implementing the deals, South Korea always backed off because they were not getting green signal from Chinese. They was not ready to. So now because of so the current political leadership has taken a very bold step and is heavily tilting towards China. So I think if the Indian leadership is creative, Indian leadership is try to understand the opportunity which has availed itself. Now we have a very golden opportunity to approach Koreans and try to ask them whatever we need from them. So we have at least 1 to 2 years, 2 years at our disposal before any change in happen in current foreign policy. So lot of things can be done in next 2 years. And then I think with the Koreans are willing to invest in India's defense industry, invest in India's new future industry, I think there's a lot of golden opportunity. I think current leadership has a political mandate to control or restrain China's impact on India-Korea relations. So this is a very golden opportunity for us.
Thank you, Dr. Lakwinder. We're almost coming to the end of the session. We don't have any other questions, but I have another one. And because the world is being carved out, into different spheres, and there are scholars who are already advocating that we were moving towards a bipolar world. The US, the West, India, on one side, and then you find Russia, China, probably North Korea on the other side. Do you think it's too soon to call, to say that the world is actually being divided already into two quite clear, distinct zones? I mean, now Korea moving towards the India sphere or the US sphere. Do you see that happening, or do you still feel that multipolarity has a chance?
Yes, I agree. I agree that battle lines are being drawn and a lot of countries are changing their position. But still, I feel that if we try our best, we can avoid the black and white situation. We can still build a stronger multilateralism. Stronger India, Korea can join together, and we can still build multilateral institutions. Defense conflict management institutions. Still, we can create a big China, India, Korea, every country together. We build a stronger partnership agreement. So situation is not hopeless. Situation is not hopeless. I think if we work together, we can avoid world being divided into two parts, and multilateralism, where interest of each country, Russia, China, India, Korea, Japan, still work together and build a new institutional mechanism. And so what we call, Americans call it a rule-based institution, but we can call it other things. We can adopt some Chinese name to it. So to testify that China can feel comfortable, that is not a China-led, USA-led institution. So I think multilateralism still have a future, still has a, but India refusing to join any bloc, it's a good sign for us. India's current policy is very strong, but India should know that its current policy cannot sustain for a long time. So we should start taking steps where we try to accommodate each other's interest also. So multilateralism has a great future. So I'm not despair to say that the world is already divided between two parts, and we still have it. Multilateralism still have hope, and India can still lead this region. As a democracy, as one of the biggest, fastest growing economy, India can play a leadership role in this region to build a new institutional mechanism in the region.
Sure, thank you. Professor Kim, your thoughts?
Yeah, clearly, as you mentioned, bipolar world is coming now at the age of a new Cold War, but at the same time, it's very different from the actual Cold War in the 20th century, because China, South Korea, or Russia, India, or other country between the two pillars has a large total trade between each other, and human exchange, also cultural exchange. So it's not the enemy each other, but anyway, bipolar rivalry between the two. So everybody play for no war between the two polar, but at the same time, this will be, we can call Cold War, Cold Peace. So we prefer Cold Peace to Cold War. So it'll be not hot war anyway. So it will be different from the original Cold War, but we'd like to try our best in keeping peace and also at the same time security development each other. So India, Republic of Korea is a forgotten partner, but is a large partner for the future generation. So it's now time to collaborate between each other. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Swaran?
Thank you. I think, first of all, whether the world is getting divided into two larger blocks, I would not say that it is happening. Ukraine war has given certain, I think, analysis of that nature, but they, to me, don't hold much ground because world is too much intertwined. So just as we have seen President Biden leading the sanctions campaign, making some people feel that that kind of divide is appearing, that divide is also highlighted or revealed the internal, within each of these groupings, the internal disjunctions, divergences that continue to persist. Europeans are speaking very different language. Each of European nations are speaking different language. So I think world is too complex and too intertwined to today think of any two blocks emerging at any stage in short term or medium term. Very quickly, very quickly, 3 points on whether China will be the glue or will be the reason why India and South Korea will come together. The first quick point is China is not a problem for only India and South Korea. It's a concern for much of the regional countries. In fact, beyond the regional countries, it is a concern that unusual, unprecedented rise of China and assertion of its policies is a concern for most players in the region. So it's not a concern only for South Korea and India. Second point, clearly India repeatedly has said that whenever offers were made either from President Putin or by President Donald Trump to mediate and help India, deal with its China challenge, India has been very clear on its policy. India does not need any other partners to deal with its China challenge. India is fully capable of dealing with its own challenge, which again is not to say that there is no consideration of China factor when India builds partnership with other countries. But that's not the sole driver of building partnerships. Those have to be autonomous partnerships. And final point, I think that is why you notice India has also repeatedly at various regional forums tried to push across the point that we should avoid narrow focus of regional organizations. They should not be only focusing on China. There are other issues of climate change, terrorism, North Korea, and so on. So therefore, India has sustained that kind of posturing where it need not be only so narrowly focused on one country. And in that sense, I think that India's stance dealing with South Korea would be, yes, China remains a major concern for both of them, but that will be only one of the multiple considerations that will go into building partnership between these two countries. And thank you for making me part of today's discussion.
Thank you, Professor Soren. General Lamba?
Thank you, Chair. Three things, quick ones. One is about China. In developing any relations of this kind, and they come into focus because of the new dynamics that evolve and what effect it will have on your country. China is a concern, but it isn't so big that it would have made a bipolar world. If you even look back, the amount of countries that are drifting away from the orbit of China, yes, you can call an axis of 4 or 5 handfuls. And so the China's drift is either not visible or not spoken about. But to me, it's the conviction that China is no longer, in my view, should be the focus of a long-term decision, particularly a strategic partnership. Once we have that fundamentally clear to a strategic leader, that China cannot be the decision maker or the foundational factor to my engagement with the other country. Otherwise, there's no point. Otherwise, your fear will overtake the greater part of your decision. Second is, we've just seen Russia and China trying to show a different attitude. This on the Ukraine war, this is very significant. You would find that actually, is it bipolar at all? Even these two countries will find it so difficult to have countries aligning with them. Well, oil is one pretext of people who are still on the Russian side, but it may not be. So I think even a combined like these two may not be able to make it a bipolar world. And so I'm hopeful that it'll be multipolar. And finally, the China factor is a consideration. It is. It must be a consideration because it's a huge economic factor. But given that, it cannot be allowed to deride your foreign policy. And countries like Vietnam, Philippines, Japan, India, all of us have been economically engaged. I'm not counting the larger countries. But in a multipolar world, if I'm not wrong, you just seen signals from the European Union actually to emerge as a power system itself. There is nobody who can foreclose this option. That do they need to be always dependent upon NATO and US, or do they need a focus of themselves? So I see a very testing times where the multipolarity is wide open. Second, China cannot be for any strategic leadership or any country that's in a reckoning of transforming its self status from a middle to a bigger power can ever go by this alignment. So I think I am hopeful that China is a factor, is a consideration, just like Russia was all this while, but it cannot converge or it cannot take you to a decisive outcome that shows you this or that. It doesn't work like that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, General. With that, we've come to the end of the presentation and the event. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies and the Korea National Defense University, I would like to thank the 4 panelists, Dr. Lakhvinder, Professor Kim, Professor Swaran and General Lamba for the very insightful first presentations and then the engagement with the audience. I learned a lot this morning, and I'd like to thank Dr. Lakhwinder for pushing forward today's agenda. And we look forward to many more opportunities of working with your institute, Dr. Lakhwinder. And I hope the audience had an equally wonderful session as I have had. And I would like all of you in joining me to thank our panelists for spending their time with us. Thank you very much. I'll pass the floor back to Kuntavi. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Just to echo Mr. Hanak's sentiments, on behalf of ISES, we'd like to extend our thanks to the panelists and moderator for an engaging and insightful discussion. We look forward to seeing you at our upcoming events. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.